Well, good morning. Please feel free to move about if you want to be able to see or hear, and there's a better way to do that. People who are out in the yard, I'm not sure how well you'll be able to hear. I'll do my best to speak up, but please feel free to come down. We could open these doors on the side too, if that would be helpful. So for those of you who were here last week, I started to speak about spiritual inspiration and spiritual discipline. And I hope I said something that was comprehensible to someone. Sometimes you get done with a talk and you think, did I just say anything or not? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but that's kind of how I felt last week. So I'm going to take another strike at it and see if anyway, if I feel different, and however you might feel about it is up to you. So one of the points I was making last week is that, particularly in Mahayana Buddhism, we focus on not just the singularity of the Buddha. We have an altar here, and the Buddha Shakyamuni is in the middle, in a high place. And that's always the case. And that's really important. But we also emphasize that the Buddha Shakyamuni there in the middle in a high place is there because it always is in relation to an uncountable assembly of beings. And we see that in the sutras spoken over and over again. So there isn't a Buddha in the high place up on Mount Sumeru preaching the Dharma for the world without the world that is receiving those teachings from the Buddha. Those come together. So when we talk about awakening, we're not just talking about this kind of singular being that is out there, but we're talking about the deep interpenetration of beings, of you as a being, as a deluded being, but also you as an awakened being. That your consciousness, at the very root of your consciousness, is a Buddha. And that Buddha and the Buddha that is here on the altar or on Mount Sumeru are reflecting each other. And that's happening throughout all space and all time. This is a fundamental teaching of Mahayana Buddhism. And so in the Lotus Sutra, we hear these famous lines, only a Buddha alone with a Buddha can understand the deep truth of the Dharma. It's a very curious statement. Only a Buddha alone with a Buddha. Usually alone and with are like not in the same sentence, right? But here they are in the same sentence. That there's a singularity, that there is only one Buddha, only one awakening. But that awakening is only true as an interpenetration, as a reflection, as a Buddha and a Buddha facing each other. And so I was saying last week that the Buddha beholding the Buddha in a human life looks like a Buddha seeking a Buddha. That we can read the truth of that, but we still have our conventional life. We still have our day-to-day deluded life. I think most of us are humans. I don't want to just assume that. There's a lot of beings, and there may be beings here listening that are hard for us to see. Okay? So whatever being you are, you have the complexity and the actuality of whatever that being is. There's a big emphasis that nirvana and samsara, nirvana being the realm of awakening and overcoming of the world of suffering, and the realm of suffering or cyclical existence, samsara, are not two things. They're always one. And this is one of the meanings of why we put our hands together in Gasho, is to remember that. These two things are always together. Now, in this seeking, a kind of journey appears. the journey of the circumstances of our particular life. For those of you, I know there's a few of you who have studied the awakening of faith in the Mahayana. This is one of the core teachings that is brought forth in this text by Ashvagosa. He says that although we're deluded beings, that our deluded world, our deluded experience, because it is inseparable from a world of awakening, is perfumed, that's the term that's used, is perfumed by the world of awakening. That the quality of our ignorance actually has the smell, right, of awakening. It is permeated by it because it isn't separate, right? It's not like a little bit of awakening is brought over into delusion. It's that the delusion itself also has the smell, the perfumed quality of awakening. That there is a Buddha amongst that delusion, or that delusion at its root is a Buddha that's looking for the Buddha. So this is very important because we have a tendency to think of the circumstances of our life as being, maybe going well or maybe going bad, but as something a little bit extra. Like there's me and there's the circumstances. So we say like the circumstances of living. If we were going to go a little more precise, we should say the circumstances that are living. There's no living apart from circumstances, right? That whatever is the stuff of your life, that is your living. It isn't that there's a living and then the stuff of your life. The stuff of your life is living. Dogen Zenji, the founder of this school of Zen Buddhism in Japan, was particularly interested in this quality of the teaching because he was surrounded by people who had taken the Buddha Dharma as an escape from the circumstances of their life. And that had become the dominant teaching, either an escape or a dismissal of the importance of it. Oh, we're living through our circumstances, but they don't really matter because we're all Buddhas anyway. And so they go around doing, stuff you shouldn't be doing. And so Dogen was really, really clear on this point and emphasized it again and again. If it's not integrated into the way that you live, it's not integrated at all. There's no such thing as integrating it into abstraction. Abstraction is always abstraction, right? That it has to be your actual life. And this is what I'm calling discipline. And yes, and last week I said the discipline of care versus a discipline of domination. If you just want to dominate the circumstances of your life, you're still stuck in that dichotomy, like the circumstances of your life are your luggage rather than your body. The circumstances of your life are your body. Right? And so the discipline that we're working on is one in which we don't try to cleave away from that body, but we learn the truth of it. And we follow that scent that's right there in the circumstances, because that can teach us about awakening. So there's this really great story. I love these old legends about the early ancestors. And I always kind of wish I was an animator so I could make an animation of these. And some animators are. In East Asia, there's some really great, I'm going to say cartoons. That maybe seems a little bit too, they're like more sophisticated than Bugs Bunny. Although Bugs Bunny's pretty great. I like Bugs Bunny. But of these things. Anyway, maybe we'll have such a thing someday. But this is a story of Upagupta, who is the fourth ancestor after Shakyamuni Buddha. And in this legend, it's said that Upagupta was such an amazing teacher. He was such a powerfully awakened being that there were just countless numbers of people that were coming to the Dharma through him. They say that when he died, they made his funeral pyre out of the little, they used to make this, I guess there's a practice of a little like wooden chit for each person that would come to the way through a teacher. There was some way to like keep track, I guess. And so they said they made his funeral pyre out of the chits of all the people who had come to the way through him. And if you've ever seen a funeral pyre, I've never seen one in actuality, but I've seen pictures of it, is a lot. There's a reason we don't cremate people with wood anymore. It's like a massive amount of wood. So he's just like this fabulous teacher. They referred to him as the Buddha with no marks. which means he didn't look like a Buddha, he just looked like a monk, but he was just like as if the Buddha Shakyamuni was still teaching. And so this caught the attention of Mara, who is the embodiment of ignorance, greed, and hate in the world of deception. And so it's said that Mara, in this legend, he's referred to as Papiya, which is another name for Mara, that he goes down to see if he can foil Upagupta. And Upagupta has just entered into a samadhi. And so Mara puts a necklace on him, a beautiful adornment, which would be not allowed for a monk, right? So I'm not sure how he's tempting him, but he's tempting him, right? He's adorning him in a way that probably he's not supposed to be. But this is how Mara works, right? Don't you love to be adorned? No. So he puts this on. And Upagupta thinks, okay, Mara, something's going to have to be done about this. And so he stands up from his sitting, and he calls to him the corpse of a dog and a snake and a human. And he holds it, and it turns into a garland of beautiful flowers. And he comes before Mara and he says, thank you for the wonderful necklace that you've given to me, that you've honored me with this necklace. In return, I give you this garland of flowers. So he hangs it around Mara's neck, and just as it comes around his neck, it returns to the corpses that it was, and filled with maggots and stench and all the kind of things we might think of as a kind of rotting flesh of these animals. And Mara is surprised and distraught. But he can't get it off. He can't get the stink of the world of cyclical existence off. He doesn't have that power. And so he goes up to the heavens. He goes to the heavenly realm, and he says to the gods there, please help me take this off. And they say, don't ask us. We're in the cycle just like you. We don't know how to get it off. Right? We're up here in this heavenly realm for now, where we don't have to deal with that, but we don't have the powers. And furthermore, this was done by Upagupta. You're just talking to people who are not awakened. And so finally, he goes to Brahma, who's the great god of all the gods, and reports this to him. And Brahma recites this poem to him. He says, Mara, if you fall over because of the ground, use the ground to get back up. If you try to get up apart from the ground, in the end, there is no way that will work. Mara, if you fall over because of the ground, use the ground to get back up. If you try to get up apart from the ground, in the end, there is no way that will work. And then he says, have you understood? You must go back to Upagupta. And Upagupta will be your teacher. And so he returns to Upagupta, and Upagupta says, oh, you've returned. He says, will you stop attacking the Dharma? And Mara says, yes. And he says, if that's true, then you must take refuge. And he takes refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And as he takes refuge, he recites the refuge verse, the corpses fall from his neck. And he's free. That's interesting. He's free. Now, this legend gets told in different parts in different ways. Sometimes it's attributed to Nagarjuna. But this line, the ground that you fall down on is the ground on which you get up. That's the only way. If you don't rely on the ground you fell on, you won't find a way to get up. And you can think about this in your own, just the physicality of it. I don't know when the last time you fell down is. It hurts. I mean, like physically fall down. I mean, I know we're falling down all the time, all the place. But like last time I fell down was quite a few years ago. I was on my bicycle, and for some reason I decided to ride when it was icy outside. Don't highly recommend it unless you have some techniques that I don't have. And I remember the bike going and just, and the feeling of the ground. Oh, man. And it was like, it's concrete, right? So it's even worse. But when you're there on the ground, one thing I like about falling down is if you kind of it's not exactly gathering your wits. It's more like letting go. Like when you've fallen down and you hit and you kind of go, your body sort of relaxes slightly. And you're like, and you feel the pain. And then like, okay, how am I gonna use this same ground, this same gravity to get up? And what am I gonna do different to relate with this gravity and this ground in a different way so that it doesn't result in this kind of boom, right? You have something you didn't have before. There's something about the relationship between gravity, the ground, and freedom. If you think about Mara here, Mara's taking refuge becomes his freedom. Freedom is different than license. License is like I get to do what I want within this realm. Freedom is something else. We oftentimes think of freedom as being about getting away from circumstances. But what I'm talking about here is just the opposite. That circumstances are what give you the freedom. They give you the freedom of movement. If we carry the metaphor out, think about how gravity allows activity. No weight, no walking. Think about those astronauts up in you ever see that? They're floating around. There's no walking. No weight, no walking. All the kind of movement that we learn to do, right, physically, is all attuned to gravity. It all is thanks to gravity that we're able to rise up into the sky. It's not to get rid of gravity that would allow us to grow in the way we've grown, to have the freedom to explore and learn. Right? It's because of gravity, even though gravity can be a pain. Right? Kyogen Carlson Roshi, co-founder of Dharma Rain Zen Center, he used to say, you can walk down the stairs or you can fall down the stairs. There's a world of difference, but it's exactly the same gravity. You can dance across the floor or you can stumble across the floor. Exactly the same circumstance. Furthermore, our intention becomes visible through gravity, through the circumstances of your life. When you have a thought, an intention, an inspiration, like I was talking about last week, and it just stays in the realm, like apart from the circumstances of your life, you can't see anything. You don't have anything to work with. You just ruminate on it. Maybe it comes back to you in dreams, or it comes back to you in fantasy, it comes back to you in different ways. But you can't really encounter it. You can't really work with it because it's staying in that kind of abstract place. But when we take our inspiration and the inspiration turns into intention and we start to carry it out, now it has a form that we can see and we can be taught by it. We're actually taught by the circumstances. The perfuming of the world of delusion can be relied on, can be utilized to tell us how to keep walking on the path. In Mahayana Buddhism in particular, we're always talking about how things are interpenetrated, how everything's involved in everything, right? I'm here because you're there. There's no just independent Ejo that's sitting up here giving a talk. We are completely intertwined. We're intertwined with the floor, with all of the natural world, with the sun, the stars, the cosmos, in all these ways. The great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh referred to this as interbeing. One of the, if not the most important teaching in Buddhism. But that is not abstract. Interbeing is not abstract. It is the actuality of living. Gravity allows all things to be included in your activity. The walking that happens through the gravity of your circumstances, the actuality of your life, is the way that all beings participate through your living. It is the expression of that interbeing. That's why it can be perfumed. That's why it can be something that teaches you. Not just because it's wiser than you. Well, it might be. Good chance it is. But because it is representative of this total interbeing. Anything that you see. I was writing, just as I was writing that note this morning, and I looked out through my window, and there's this hummingbird going to every purple flower there in my garden. The purple flowers are starting, I forget what they're called, they're starting to wilt. They're kind of getting at their last edges. They're probably very sweet, and this hummingbird. That's such a nice circumstance. And then I remembered the beeping of the heart monitor in the ICU that I was with my mother the past few weeks. Every time it goes off, you think this is the end. Similar sound almost. Circumstance. The circumstances are our connection. They are our interbeing, and our responsiveness to them is how the path unfolds. Responsiveness is responsibility. It requires commitment. Right? It requires the discipline of saying, I'm going to take care of this thing, and I'm going to come back to it again and again and again and again. That's a root of responsibility. And the circumstances of our life are an opportunity for our responsiveness. And the way we can transmute them is to take responsibility. Now, taking responsibility does not mean making everything your own fault. That's not what I mean. Right? It's a very subtle difference. Making it all your own fault, saying it's all about just what I did, I'm always wrong, I'm always wrong, I'm always wrong. No. It means, actually the opposite. It means a lot of times I'm not wrong, and someone else is being very problematic. How do I respond to that? That's my responsibility. Not to take all the blame myself, but my response to say, line right here. You need to stay on the other side. Or step off. Or why are you blaming me for this? Those are all ways to be responsible. Right? And so in the discipline, there is a return. There's a return to what is present there as your life, but a return where we're looking for the truth that is coming through that circumstance. And that's how we cultivate the discipline. It won't happen without inspiration, though. If you're just kind of resigned to your fate, there's a place for that. But it's kind of way over on one side. You don't want to stay there for too long. As you have a kind of resignation, you say, what inspires me? What's caught my attention? What smells like nirvana? Not because I think I understand what that is, but just because I'm inspired by it. I want to step into it a little bit. Now, my practical advice, the reason I'm talking about this is because we're headed back into regular practice at the temple, and there's a lot of programs going on, and our regular kind of study here is available. And it's also true that many people, as the fall starts to be in the air, as the things turn, there's a kind of natural calling to more study and practice. Now, whether that's because we all got forced into that through the cycle of public education or not, I don't know. But there seems to be that the air cools and it's like, oh, I need to go to class. So it's quite likely by the end of September, the hall will be much more full, there'll be much more activity, there'll be a lot more things going on. And so I'm just trying to give you some of my reflections on how it is that you might meet this. So I have a few pieces of practical advice. The first is, take your inspiration seriously. Really, really take it seriously. And no one can tell you what that is. It might be a book of poetry. It might be something really difficult in your life a relationship that's difficult, and you're like, I need to do something with this. It might be the stars, it might be a sutra, it might be meditation, right? But really, whatever it is that's calling there, take it seriously. And again, whether it comes from a difficult place or it comes from an exciting place, or both, most things start on one side or the other, and they make their way across relatively quickly. Something you're excited about will lead you to something that's difficult. Something that's difficult will lead you to something that you're excited about. So you don't need to worry about it. Just if you feel like, wow, this is something I want to take care of, I want to be responsive to, right? Take that seriously. We get talked out of a lot of our inspiration. You know, Mara would just slip a garland on you. And you'll feel like, hey, I got this great necklace. What more do I need? Second piece of practical advice. Care for the fire of your inspiration with the proper fuel. This has been my shtick for 20 years now. It's about making a fire. Those of you who have had the life where you make a fire, we heated with wood for a couple decades, that was all. So I made a lot of fires, and I learned to make them quickly and to make them hot so they don't produce smoke. If you're in the city and you're going to heat with wood, that's a responsibility that you have. And so I learned that, I've really studied it carefully. And there's this interesting thing that happens. And probably if you've ever made a fire, the same dynamic is there. You have some kind of starter. I would usually use newspaper unless it was out in the woods or something. And then you light that, and you've got to put the right dryness of wood on there. And it's got to be the right size. So don't take your big old wet, soggy log of despair and just like put it on top of the and then be like, burn. It's not going to happen. You're just going to put it out, right? So you want to take the fuel that you know is dry, the fuel that's ready for burning, the part of you that can feel the excitement or feels the possibility of some movement. Add that there, right? Be gentle with yourself, but put it there on the flames, and then add a little more and a little more and a little more. This is both about quantity and quality, right? Quantity and quality of the wood. Pay attention to it. And add the fuel appropriately. If you add it too slow, the fire will just go out. If you add it too quickly, the fire will go out. Right? You have to feel for what's the appropriate amount and then add it on. And you can know that because the fire will thrive. If the fire's not responding, then you know there's something about the fuel that's not quite right. Well, go look for some other fuel. If it's gone out, light her up again, right? Or I could say, look for the fire again. Look for the part that's tugging on you. That's where you can light the paper. I would say the biggest two things that people do is they either talk themselves out of something they're inspired by in practice. Now, if I limit it to study of Buddha Dharma particularly, they talk themselves out of it. They say, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not ready enough, I'm not whatever enough. And then you just say, nah, and you check yourself out. The other biggest ways is people just say, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to come for meditation every morning at 5 o'clock, and I'm going to stay through breakfast, and I'm going to go to every class and every evening thing and all of the sutras, and I'm going to read them all, and I'm going to now be a Buddha in December, right? And then you just go, and you're completely wiped out. It's usually not quite that bad, but we have those kind of inclinations. There's plenty of other ways, but those two are really big. So know that about yourself. Are you a person who tends to just jump in too much and then not be able to do it? Or are you a person who kind of holds back because you don't think that you're got what it takes or whatever? And feel that and say, okay, back off it a little bit if you're the person who tends to go too far. If you're the person who holds back a little bit, take a little risk and look for the place where you can step forward. Point 3. Discipline is about seeing something through. Okay? You decide to do something, and then you see it through. But it's very, very easy for the seeing it through to become about brute force. Right? And what you want to do is decide to do something, see it through, but the way you see it through is by returning to the gravity, not by just pushing yourself forward. When you're like, oh God, I decided to come to all these lectures on Thursday night that Ejo's coming about the Genjo Kwan, and he just goes on and on and on again, and I've got a long week, and maybe tonight I won't go. One thing you can do is say, what will the Sangha think of me, or what will Ejo think of me, or what will I think of myself if I don't go, and let me just get my crowbar out of my own self-image and get myself there. Oftentimes the people who show up every single time, that's how they're showing up. It's not necessarily better than the person who didn't show up, who didn't get out the crowbar of kind of self-image and heave themselves in. So the showing up or not showing up is really important, but how it is that you do that. The discipline there, when you're in that place, is to come back down to the gravity of it, to say, okay, how am I responsive to the situation, the circumstances of my entire life? It's Thursday, I'm tired, I've had a hard week, I don't know if I can do this. And then to feel your way back down to the ground, feel your way back down to the circumstances and say, okay, is there a way that I can feel the integrity that this participation and seeing through brings to my being, brings to my way of living, and move from that place? The discipline develops when we can come back to that integrity of the gravity, rather than just the gravity of our own self-preoccupation. You can feel for the integrity of your bodies. When I say bodies, they're on purpose. Physical body, your mental body, your spiritual body, all of those have an integrity. And so in the discipline, you feel for them. And it means sometimes seeing something through means you won't show up for something physically. And then my last point of advice is that this happens through continual refuge. Refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dharma, refuge in the Sangha. Refuge in that continual reflection of the Buddha, illumination of the world. A continual refuge in the teaching that comes from that. The teaching that's in the form of sutras, but the teaching that comes to you as the circumstances of your life. You know, we say that all of the world, all of your experience, all of your living are the letters of a sutra. You're learning to read the sutra. That's what your journey is. Learning to read the sutra of the world. And refuge in the Sangha, refuge in the community. That's both a spiritual community, like here at Buddha Eye, made up of beings, seen and unseen, but also the larger spiritual community of all beings. In the Chinese, when we write the word refuge, it's read in Japanese pronunciation, namu kie. So you oftentimes hear that, namu kie butsu, namu kie ho, namu kie so. If you come to certain kinds of talks and things, you hear the teacher will recite that. Right? Namu is from Sanskrit, and it's a lot like what we're more familiar with. The form of namu is om. People know that. You've seen the syllable and everything, om. It's like the sound of the entire vibration of the universe. It's a way to pay homage. Right? So namu means homage, or it's translated as homage, but it's vibrational. It is the foundational vibration of all things. And ki means to return, and e means to rely. So namu is the vibration of the wholeness of all things. It is Upagupta's mind. It is the Buddha's illumination. It is the ground of being. Literally, like physically, mentally, spiritually. Right? And so when we take refuge, we return and rely on that ground, which is the wholeness of the mind of awakening. And then it can teach us. This is where discipline resides. We have a little time for questions or comments.
In regard to the complexities of showing up and not showing up, what relation, and that's very interesting to me, because I'm not caught up in that stuff, the relationship of equanimity to that.
Yeah, good point. It can be, it's one of the places that really can, it's not such a great image, but like rotor-rooter our mind. We get like a clog in there, and this show up or not show up is one of these things that can really help clean out our preoccupation, particularly with the way that we view ourselves and the way that we want to be viewed, who we think we are. And so depending on our constitution, there could be a lot of ways with this. Depending, like some people, like you're a shower up. You're a person who shows up. You come again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And so from your side, the frustrations or challenges are going to be different than a person who's really like, I don't like to join things. I don't want to be the person who says, I'm going to go every time. That's not really how I function. And I've seen too much dysfunction through that kind of thing. So I don't want to do that. So challenges will be really different in those places. But in any case, the deep listening that we do in relationship to finding the integrity, what's the integrity of the way that I decide about my action? Not just falling into the pattern that is normal for me. That's where the tool can do its work. So if you're a person who's always shows up, then are you really feeling for the time when it would be better not to show up physically, but to show up spiritually? If you're the kind of person who pulls back a lot, then feel for that integrity. When's the place where you can show up, and that's going to be the challenge for you that helps to unfold it. You're a person of very long practice and insight. What kind of frustrations have you found in the being a person who shows up, and is there any medicine in there that you've discovered?
It's somewhat easy to judge people that don't.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy.
Yeah. I think that's just a perfect example. Because you see people, well, they didn't show up. I'm a person who's much more like that. Just show up. And then if you're sensitive to that, you'll see that there's this whole elevation of your place, like your seat gets higher and higher, and you start glowing with gold and everything. And what are these people down here that don't know? They're not doing it. So great, when you notice that, is there any particular medicine that you use in relationship to that?
Well, and the flip side is that people would show up and they would make noise.
Yeah.
That would always bug me.
Yeah.
And it took me quite a while to go, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah. So right in the noise, like, okay, if a person just like, let's say they're just kind of naturally a little bit noisy breather, that never bugs me. The one that bugs me is the person who's gone to like a couple yoga classes or something, and they're like, they're like really, really into it. And maybe we'll have a little less of that now. Anyway, it doesn't happen that often. But the person who's like, they're really doing that. When I found, like, I would just be like, So sometimes I would say something, mostly because I'm concerned about the person now. But it used to be because it would just really make me mad. But if you return to that, okay, see, this is what I mean by returning to the ground. Someone's showing up, they don't come very often, they've come now, and they're being disruptive. And not intentionally disruptive, but kind of doing something extra that they're instructed not to do that is disruptive. Not just kind of by the nature of their being. which I guess that's the nature of the being. Anyway, if you stay present with it, what can you smell of nirvana in that? Like, okay, a period where someone breathes like that? Is that such a problem? A Sunday morning where someone decides to use their chainsaw? Is that even conceivable? That on Sunday morning at 9:15, you'd be like, I'm gonna just cut stuff down. Like, what are you thinking? Leaf blower. So, if you smell it, right, the frustration calls your attention to it. If you smell it deeply, there's a little door there about your own kind of uptightness. And that is way more valuable than your capacity to stop something that you think is, distracting. Now, if it's disturbing, if someone's getting hurt, then we need to respond in the moment. But usually, the frustration's coming from something that's relatively silly, like relatively. And then we have that, that place to practice with it.
Hey, Joe.
I,
So I fell last week. I was running, which I shouldn't do because I have terrible bunions, and my doctor says, don't do it, and it's like, oh.
Mhm.
And I missed my foot, and I recovered, and I over-recovered, and then I went zip, and I was in Florida, so everything was paved, and scraped lots of skin. The ground is I have to know the thing that also resists me, because I can't, I'm so aware when I'm aware of just that biomechanics, which is my interdependence with everything. We all evolved on this planet. Like, the gravity isn't just the condition, it's like, it is life.
Yeah.
It's our planet.
Yeah.
Until we screw that up.
Yeah.
But I guess for me, as someone who deals with resistance all the time in every facet, it's that remembrance of the suffering, which is actually me and my teacher and the Buddha, samsara and nirvana. And so learning more and more to trust the resistance.
Yeah.
Vis-a-vis showing up, not showing up, learning to really deeply, deeply, deeply trust the teaching of resistance.
Yeah.
And then neosporin.
Yeah, that's for it's good. We were talking, it was reminding me of I would say for most people, we're called to a spiritual practice through some kind of calling towards ascendance. We want to ascend. And actually, it is our birthright to ascend. Ascension is completely available. But the mistake we make is that we think that the ascension happens from a cleaving off of the relationship to the ground. And it's exactly the opposite. That the relationship to the ground is what allows the central channel to open and for the eye to be fully illuminated and for the depths of that earth to be known even though they're completely unseen. And so while the image of the ground is very horizontal, it provides the possibility for us to come to know what is vertical, and the two need each other completely. Ascendancy becomes a problem when it's cleaved from the earth, it's cleaved from the horizontal. It will always then be used to destroy. That's the only thing it can do. It will become, the fire of heaven that burns up the earth. And that happens, I'm not just speaking in kind of like Abrahamic Armageddon terms. I'm talking about your mind in any moment that when that ascendance happens, it wants to burn the earth. And you can see that in the way, in your meditation, when you come to a tranquil state, you come to a certain measure of quietness, when that is unhooked from the ground, the person who's breathing loud is horrible, right? They're like, they will call out your wrath, right? And the fire of your unrooted place will come through. So then you learn about, like, oh, I'm not touching the ground, right? So we can practice that right in the immediate moment of study of the mind through meditation. And then that plays out within the day-to-day living. And that's why meditation affects your life so much. It's not just because you take 20 minutes and get really calm and then you're calmer for the rest of the day. It's because you realign to that dynamic. And realigning in that dynamic, then you have a different possibility. Anyway, these are the kind of things we're going to talk about in the various things that are happening in the next few months leading up to the retreat of the Buddha's Awakening in the first part of December. So all that information's online, and we have some paper copies, etc., that are here. Dokyu, could you do that again? Yeah. Would you grab those and have the sign up? We have some sign up forms and stuff like that. If you have any questions, Dokyu, Joichi have been involved in that. Myobun's head of the program committee, so she's super familiar. Reiko, June. So anyway, grab any of those people and ask them about things if you want to get involved in something. And again, it's really your inspiration, you know. I was remembering, and I promise I'll stop talking after I say this. I was remembering a couple years ago one of my inspirations, which really had a huge effect on my life. I had taken up this habit of bringing my laptop to me when I would get into bed, and I would check the last few emails before I go to bed, and maybe look at Amazon or whatever. Who knows? Just what a random thing that I needed to keep the dopamine pumping in my brain, I guess. And I was like, I just didn't feel good, and I really like poetry. But I didn't grow up reading lots and lots of poetry. But there's a few poets that I had started liking, and so William Stafford is one of them. He's it was like one of my early, I don't know, you have your first love, I guess. And so I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I want to read poetry. So, and my wife loves it if I read poetry to her. And so it's like, okay, I'm not going to bring, it doesn't come in my bedroom. And I have my few poetry books here by my bedside, and that's what I'm going to do each night before I go to bed, is I'll read a couple poems to her, and then she usually falls asleep, and then I'll read as many poems as I want. I could stay up all night and read poems if I want, but I'm not going to read anything else. Oh my God. I mean, you just start seeing the world in a different way, you know, because the input, the way it is that your mind is being formed by what it is that you care to engage changes really huge, right? So I'm not encouraged, I mean, actually I'm encouraging you to all read poetry before you go to bed, but that might not be your inspiration. But whatever your inspiration is, that kind of thing, even it's something relatively small like that, when you return to it again and again, that's where the integrity develops from. So I think tonight might be the re-engagement of such a thing.